The ex-girlfriend of Sean Diddy Combs is back on the stand for a second day in the music mogul's criminal trial. Cassie Ventura shared shocking allegations of abuse during her testimony yesterday, and she also gave graphic details on the so-called freak-offs and then broke down in tears when asked about how she felt about the alleged events. Ventura said they made her feel disgusting and humiliated. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all 5 charges, including sex trafficking.
And a quick note to our viewers right now, CNN's coverage of this trial. You'll see on the left side of your screen, you'll see information coming in from our reporters who are inside the courtroom. It will be updating throughout the show. That's because there is no video or audio recording allowed in federal courts.
All right, let's bring in CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig and former federal prosecutor Alyse Adamson. Great to have you both here. So Ventura is still testifying. This is her second day. Right now she is talking about that Uber ride home after the video we've seen from the hotel where Diddy is seen pulling her, attacking her. Tell us about her testimony and why that video is so important.
Well, so this is more corroboration. This is more support that prosecutors are trying to build in to Cassie Ventura's testimony. Of course, the surveillance video of the hotel assault is the most important piece, but now we're seeing the prosecutors use some other pieces of evidence, selfies, text messages, emails, things that were on Cassie Ventura's phone because they want the jury to believe her unconditionally. And I want to make an important point here that the defense argument is that, yes, this was domestic violence, but it's not racketeering, it's not sex trafficking. But it's important to know, and I think prosecutors are going to argue this, those things are not mutually exclusive. It can be both. In fact, one of the things prosecutors have to show is that there was force or coercion. And so that beating, if I was the prosecutor, I would argue, yeah, you bet it's domestic violence, but it also goes to the sex trafficking and racketeering.
Because the argument could be made that from the prosecution side is that was a form of coercion, that
exactly.
Perhaps she was afraid that she would get beaten up, and that is why she did some of these acts. And we should note, she talked about the selfies where she had a swollen lip and a black eye under her sunglasses. So clearly the prosecution is trying to draw that out. Wolf.
And it's interesting, Alyse, because right now we're being told by our reporters who are inside the courtroom that Cassie Ventura reviewed a binder of more than a dozen photos that were shown, and clearly she was upset. She said she typically reached out to escorts to arrange these freak-offs because it was her job, and she felt she would be punished if she didn't do that.
Yeah, that's incredibly important because remember, the defense opened on the fact that Ventura was a willing participant. That's their theory of the case, that she was Combs' lover and she wanted to be there. And so they had to grapple, the prosecution had to grapple with the fact that Ventura was the one that was arranging some of these freak-offs. I think the prosecution is doing a wonderful job explaining why that was. By framing this as a job instead of something that she wanted to do, it makes it clear that there perhaps was that coercion. And by tying it to that violence, as Elie just said, the photos, the corroboration of the black eyes, shows that she didn't really have a choice. She was going to be punished if she didn't comply, and that's key.
And she said that she just testified under oath that when she paid these men to be in these so-called freak-offs, it was with Combs' money. That's what she's saying.
Yeah, I think the argument prosecutors are trying to make here is it sounds a little strange, but the freak-offs are not about the sex, or at least the sex is not what's relevant to you, the jury. What's relevant is those freak-offs show the element of coercion, as Alyse was saying, and they show that there's some organization at play here. Remember, this is a racketeering charge, the first charge here, and that means that there was some sort of organized enterprise that was committing multiple crimes. So prosecutors need to show this was more than whatever sexual proclivities may have been, felt here by Sean Combs. There was some organization here with respect to people and methods and payments, and I think that's what prosecutors are building on.
And also another important point, you have the racketeering and the sex trafficking charge, and what I've noticed, and she just talked about it, was the fact that some of this happened across state lines, that it happened in different states, and that is key in terms of the sex trafficking charge. Also, she's talking right now about, in January 2016, that Combs sent her a text that he wanted to have a proper FO, freak-off, where they didn't take ketamine. Of course, drugs have also been a big part of all of this. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, the crossing state lines is what gets us into federal court. It sounds like they're going to have no problem establishing that. This happened in California, New York, New Jersey, Florida, and elsewhere. Yes. So the point with the the freak-offs, and we're going to have a proper freak-off and that kind of thing, and the drugs are part of the persuasion. The drugs are part of the coercion, the threats that make this more than just sex or even more than just domestic violence.
And if I could just add, I mean, that's what Ventura said, that she had to take the drugs to dissociate so she could participate. That doesn't sound like willing participation to me. It probably won't sound like willing participation to a jury.
It's interesting, Alyse. Right now, Cassie Ventura is 8 months pregnant with a very visible baby bump. We've learned that the defense asked the judge to have her seated in the witness box before the jury came in, arguing that her pregnancy would prejudice the jury against Combs. The judge said no. What do you think of that request?
Yeah, look, Wolf, I knew the defense had to try, right? Because they're not going to view her as this 22-year-old girl who set up all of these meetings. They're looking at her now as a 38-year-old mother, and it could possibly invoke some sympathy in the jurors. Listen, jurors are human beings. They're going to feel things, but you can't hide the fact that this is a pregnant woman. And so I think the judge rightly said no. She's going to be able to walk to the witness stand, and she's not doing anything to inflame the passions of the jury. I don't hear any reporting of her really playing up her pregnancy, but they're going to have to contend with the fact that Cassie is a person. And from everything I've heard from the reporting, she is also testifying very well, very credibly and emotionally.
And she's there with her husband, who's inside with her as well. And just now we're being told by our reporters in the courtroom that Ventura testified that she tried to avoid kissing the escorts during the so-called freak-offs because it felt too intimate and made me squeamish. That's what she said. And explain to our viewers in terms that we can use here on CNN what these freak-offs were.
Oh boy, that's quite an assignment. What they were these extended, sometimes for a day or 2 days, sexual gatherings. They would usually do them in hotel rooms. Sean Combs would arrange them and engineer them. He would tell Cassie what to do. They would bring in male escorts. One of the things Sean Combs would do is watch Cassie with those male escorts. There were all sorts of lubricants involved. There's baby oil. It's part of this case. But again, the thing that's really relevant to this trial is not whether one agrees or disagrees with the sexual proclivities or is offended by it, but were these voluntary activities? And I think the prosecution's point, as Alyse was saying, is the more extreme this conduct was, the less likely it is that Cassie Ventura would have consented to this, and that she was doing it because she felt forced or compelled or under a threat.
Yeah. How should the defense approach questioning Ventura during cross-examination?
Yeah, so remember, Pamela, she's pregnant, and that's relevant because of the sensitivities involved in that. At the same time, I think you have to get to the core issue, right? You could, as Elie said, take what she said. Hey, this happened, that abuse happened. You can believe your eyes, they're not lying. What I want to focus on, ladies and gentlemen, is the issue of a 10-year relationship. And there came a point in year 2 where he brought up to you, that is Sean Combs, that we want to do this. We want to be a little freaky. We want to get other people involved, right? You had an opportunity to say no. Did you? You had an opportunity to walk away in year 3. Did you? Year 4, year 5, you continued with it. Is that right? In fact, you paid some of these performers and you wanted and were enjoying these experiences, right? Okay. And so the issue really involves force, fraud, or coercion. And in fact, you called one of the male sex workers back up to re-engage in activities, and you, quite frankly, enjoyed it. So it's important to know, Pamela, the issue really is not about a person's sex life on trial. Jurors are not there to be the morality police. They're not there to police whether or not someone has a sex life we agree with, we think is appropriate. We may think they're sick and demented. The issue is it a federal offense? Where's the fraud? Where's the coercion, right? Where is it that there was a gun put to your head and you said, hey, you need to do this? You could have opted out of the relationship, the defense will say, on several occasions. Did you do that? Oh, well, he was affecting my career. Okay, but, right, there are other people besides Sean Combs that you could potentially have relied upon, that you could have potentially gone out with, right? So the bottom line is, yes, there are a lot of sensitivities, Pamela, in this cross-examination, and a lot of things I said where people may be throwing things at the TV screen. But at the end of the day, keep your eyes on the prize. The defense attorneys would say, not about sex, not about salaciousness, it's about criminality.